The morning sun filtered through the massive crystal windows of the Galactic Academy's main hall as hundreds of faculty members gathered for what many consider the most important briefing in the institution's 1,000-year history. Dean Vextar, a towering figure with purple skin and 4 writhing tentacles where arms should be, stood at the podium looking more nervous than anyone had ever seen him. The dean's voice echoed through the hall as he addressed a crowd of professors, administrators, and security personnel. Today marks a historic moment for our academy. We are about to welcome our first student from the planet Earth, a world that has been classified as a Class 12 Death World by the Galactic Survey Commission. A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Class 12 was the highest danger rating possible. These were worlds where evolution had gone completely mad, producing creatures so deadly that most civilized species wouldn't even consider landing there. The human species, the dean continued, his tentacles twitching with barely controlled anxiety, comes from a planet where 96% of all life forms are considered lethal to standard galactic biology. Their oceans contain predators the size of starships. Their land masses are populated by creatures that can tear through military-grade armor. Even their plant life is often poisonous or carnivorous. Professor Yilnara, the Academy's head of student safety, raised one of her 6 arms. Dean, what special protocols should we implement? Should we increase security presence in the dormitories? Perhaps install additional medical stations? The dean nodded gravely. All standard Death World protocols are in effect. However, I must stress that humans themselves are not necessarily aggressive. According to our cultural exchange files, they are generally peaceful beings who have simply adapted to survive on their nightmare planet. But make no mistake, that adaptation has made them incredibly dangerous. He pulled up a holographic display showing various Earth creatures. The faculty gasped as images of sharks, bears, venomous snakes, and hunting spiders filled the air above them. These are just some of the predators humans live alongside every single day. They consider them normal parts of their environment. Dr. Kethmole, a small, rabbit-like creature who taught interspecies psychology, spoke up nervously. How do we know the human won't see us as threats? What if their Death World instincts kick in? That's exactly why we must be extremely careful, the dean replied. We've arranged for the human to have a private dormitory suite away from other students initially. We'll monitor their behavior and slowly integrate them into regular student life if they prove stable. The massive transport bay doors began to hum, signaling an incoming vessel. Every eye in the hall turned toward the entrance as the dean straightened his formal robes. Remember, everyone, this human represents their entire species' first impression of our galactic community. We must be welcoming, but cautious. The transport ship settled onto the landing pad with a soft thud. Steam hissed in the airlocks as the doors slowly opened. Security guards positioned themselves strategically around the room, trying to look casual while remaining ready for anything. Out of the ship stepped a figure that made everyone do a double take. Jake Thompson looked nothing like what they had expected from a Deathworlder. He was average height for most humanoid species, with messy brown hair and friendly blue eyes. He wore simple blue pants that humans called jeans, a comfortable shirt, and a jacket with Earth University written across the front. A well-worn backpack hung from his shoulders, and he carried what appeared to be a simple water bottle. The most shocking thing about him was his expression. Instead of the hardened, battle-ready look everyone expected from someone who survived daily encounters with megapredators, Jake had a warm, genuine smile. He looked around the hall with obvious excitement and wonder, like a tourist seeing something amazing for the first time. "Wow," Jake said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "This place is incredible. The architecture is absolutely beautiful." The alien students who had gathered to catch a glimpse of the legendary Deathworlder began whispering among themselves in confusion. This ordinary-looking creature was supposed to be from the most dangerous planet in the galaxy? He looked like he could barely harm a flower, much less survive alongside the monsters they had just seen in the dean's presentation. Jake walked toward the faculty group, his movements relaxed and unhurried, completely unaware of the tension his presence had created. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's arrival at the Galactic Academy, and word about the human Deathworlder had spread throughout the campus like wildfire. Most students went out of their way to avoid him, crossing hallways when they saw him coming and whispering nervously whenever he entered a room. Jake, completely oblivious to their fear, simply assumed everyone was being politely quiet around the new student. The Xenobiology lecture hall was the Academy's largest classroom, designed to accommodate students from dozens of different species. Its tiered seating could hold over 300 beings, and the central demonstration area was equipped with the most advanced containment systems in the galaxy. Today, however, the usually packed hall felt eerily empty. Professor Krillvan was a veteran educator who had been teaching dangerous creature studies for over 40 years. His reptilian features and calm demeanor had helped countless students overcome their fears of the galaxy's more terrifying life forms. But even he felt nervous as he prepared for today's lesson. The massive containment unit he wheeled into the center of the hall was unlike anything most students had ever seen. It stood nearly 4 meters tall and was constructed from military-grade, transparent aluminum, the same material used in starship hulls. Warning lights blinked ominously around its base, and a low hum of powerful force fields filled the air. Inside the unit, barely visible through the heavily tinted viewing panels, lay something that had become the stuff of nightmares across 3 star systems. The Vortex Slasher was a creature that defied easy description. It measured 3 meters from its razor-sharp snout to the tip of its armored tail, with muscles that rippled beneath midnight black scales. 6 legs ended in claws capable of tearing through steel plating, while its elongated head housed rows of teeth designed for one purpose: killing efficiently. The creature had been captured after a months-long military operation that had cost dozens of lives. It had single-handedly wiped out an entire mining colony on Kepler for 42B, leaving behind only shredded metal and terror. The Galactic Defense Force had eventually subdued it using enough tranquilizers to knock out a small army, and it had remained in deep sedation ever since. Professor Krillvan looked out at his students, noting how they had all instinctively moved to the back rows of the amphitheater. Even his bravest pupils, the ones who usually sat close to get a better view, had retreated to what they considered a safer distance. All except one. Jake Thompson sat in the very front row, directly in front of the containment unit. He had his notebook open and a pen ready, looking for all the world like he was about to attend a lecture on basic mathematics rather than observe one of the galaxy's most feared predators. His casual posture and relaxed expression stood in stark contrast to the tense, fearful atmosphere that filled the rest of the hall. "Good morning, class," Professor Krillvan began, his voice slightly strained despite his years of experience. "Today we will be studying apex predators and their role in galactic ecosystems. The specimen before us represents the pinnacle of evolutionary killing efficiency." The students shifted nervously in their seats, many of them unable to even look directly at the containment unit. Some of the more sensitive species had already activated their personal shielding devices, while others clutched emergency communication devices in case they needed a call for help. "The Vortex Slasher," the professor continued, "is considered one of the most dangerous creatures known to galactic science. Its hunting success rate approaches 98%, and no sentient being has ever survived a direct encounter with an active specimen." That's when Jake's hand shot up into the air. "Casual as you please." The professor paused mid-sentence, surprised by the interruption. Around the hall, students turned to stare at the human, with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "Yes, Jake?" Professor Krillvan asked, genuinely curious about what the human might want to know. Jake's question came out in the same tone someone might use to ask about the weather. "Professor, I'm wondering about its bite force. How does it compare to a saltwater crocodile from my planet? And what about its hunting strategies? Does it ambush prey like a big cat, or is it more of a pursuit predator?" The silence that followed was deafening. Students stared at Jake with wide eyes, unable to comprehend how anyone could speak so casually about comparing galactic nightmare fuel to creatures from their own world. To them, Jake had just revealed that his home planet contained things comparable to the Vortex Slasher, and he talked about them like they were neighborhood pets. Professor Krillvan had just begun explaining the Slasher's hunting patterns when the Academy's main power grid experienced what would later be classified as a catastrophic failure. The massive fusion reactors that powered the entire facility suddenly fluctuated, sending electrical surges through every system on campus. The first sign of trouble was the subtle dimming of the lecture hall's overhead lighting. Students barely noticed at first, too focused on Jake's unsettling questions about Earth's predators. But then the lights began to flicker more dramatically, casting eerie shadows across the room that danced and jumped with each power surge. Professor Krill Van frowned and tapped his communication device. Maintenance. This is Professor Krill Van in Lecture Hall 7. We're experiencing power fluctuations during a live specimen demonstration. Please advise. Static crackled from the device before a panicked voice broke through. Professor, we have a campus-wide emergency. Multiple system failures across all sectors. The backup generators are struggling to maintain critical systems only. As if on cue, the emergency lighting system activated with a harsh red glow that bathed the entire hall in an ominous crimson wash. The normal white lights shut down completely, leaving only the pulsing red beacons that were designed to guide students to emergency exits during crisis situations. The containment unit's warning lights began flashing more rapidly, and the steady hum of its force field generators started to fluctuate in pitch. Professor Krill Van's reptilian features went pale as he realized what was happening. The containment system was losing power. Class dismissed immediately, he announced, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Please proceed to the nearest emergency exits in an orderly fashion. But it was already too late. The force field generators emitted a high-pitched whine as they struggled against the power surge. Sparks began flying from the containment unit's control panel, and the transparent aluminum viewing panels started to vibrate ominously. The military-grade containment system that had safely held the galaxy's most dangerous predator was failing catastrophically. With a sound like breaking glass mixed with electronic screaming, the containment field collapsed entirely. Inside the unit, the Vortex Slasher's eyes snapped open for the first time in months. They glowed with an intelligent malevolence that sent ice-cold terror through every living being in the room. The massive creature had been in deep sedation, but the sudden change in electromagnetic fields had triggered its predatory instincts to wake up. The Slasher's head turned slowly, taking in its new surroundings with the calculating gaze of a perfect killing machine. Its nostrils flared as it caught the scent of dozens of potential prey items scattered throughout the lecture hall. After months of forced unconsciousness, it was hungry, angry, and ready to hunt. What happened next could only be described as pure chaos. Students began screaming and running in every direction at once. The orderly evacuation that Professor Krillvan had called for instantly became a stampede of terrified beings pushing and shoving to reach the exits. Species that could fly took to the air, crashing into each other and the ceiling fixtures. Those with natural camouflage abilities tried to blend into the walls and floors, while others simply froze in place, overwhelmed by primal fear. The Slasher rose to its full height inside the now powerless containment unit, its massive frame filling the space completely. With casual ease, it pushed against the transparent aluminum panels that had held it captive. The material, designed to withstand weapons fire, cracked like an eggshell under the creature's strength. As students fled toward the exits, one small figure stumbled and fell near the main doorway. Pip, a Zentorian exchange student barely half the size of most humanoids, had been knocked down in the panic. His large, innocent eyes filled with terror as he looked back toward the containment unit just in time to see the Slasher break free completely. The creature's predatory instincts locked onto a fallen student immediately. Here was easy prey, separated from a herd and vulnerable. The Slasher's muscles coiled as it prepared to pounce, saliva already dripping from its razor-sharp teeth in anticipation of its first meal in months. That's when Jake Thompson calmly stood up from his front row seat. While 300 alien students ran screaming for their lives, the human simply rose from his chair and stepped directly into the Slasher's path. He positioned himself between the massive predator and the terrified Zentorian student with the casual confidence of someone stepping between two friends having an argument. "Hey there, big guy," Jake said conversationally, as if he were greeting a neighbor's dog rather than facing down a creature that had terrorized star systems. The Slasher's attention immediately shifted from the fallen Zentorian to this new target, its glowing eyes fixed on Jake with predatory focus, recognizing something different about this particular prey item. This one wasn't running. This one wasn't showing fear. This one was standing its ground and looking directly back at it. Jake rolled up the sleeves of his university hoodie with the practiced ease of someone about to tackle a routine household chore. His movements were unhurried and methodical, like he was preparing to fix a leaky pipe or change a car tire. "This should be interesting," he muttered under his breath. The Vortex slasher lunged forward with a speed and power that had made it the terror of 3 star systems. Its massive claws extended, ready to tear through whatever stood in its way. For a creature that had never failed to kill its target, this should have been just another easy hunt. What happened next defied everything the remaining observers thought they knew about predator-prey dynamics. Jake didn't dodge dramatically or pull out some futuristic weapon. Instead, he did something that looked almost boring in its simplicity. As the slasher came at him, Jake stepped slightly to one side and grabbed the creature's leading arm at what appeared to be a completely random spot near its shoulder joint. The 3-meter killing machine suddenly found itself off balance and stumbling forward past its intended target. Jake had somehow used the creature's own momentum against it, redirecting all that deadly force into empty air. It was like watching someone effortlessly step aside from a charging bull, except Jake made it look as casual as avoiding a puddle on the sidewalk. Before the slasher could recover, Jake was already moving to his next step. His hands found specific points along the creature's neck and spine with the precision of someone who had studied anatomy his entire life. But this wasn't academic knowledge. This was a kind of practical understanding that came from growing up on a world where knowing exactly how living things were put together could mean the difference between life and death. The slasher tried to twist around to face this unexpected threat, but found that certain parts of his body were no longer responding properly. Jake had applied pressure to nerve clusters that the creature didn't even know it had, temporarily disrupting the signals between its brain and muscles. It was like someone had found the off switches built into the predator's own nervous system. Within seconds, the galaxy's most feared killing machine was on the ground, completely immobilized but otherwise unharmed. Jake maintained his hold with one hand while checking his watch with the other, apparently more concerned about his schedule than the fact that he had just single-handedly neutralized a creature that required military intervention to capture. "Chew easy now," Jake said in the same soothing tone someone might use to calm a frightened pet. "Security's coming. Just relax, and this'll all be over soon." The slasher's eyes showed confusion rather than pain. It wasn't injured, just completely unable to move. Every time it tried to struggle, Jake would adjust his grip slightly, and the creature would find itself even more helpless than before. It was as if the human had a complete understanding of how the slasher's body worked, better than the creature itself did. Professor Krillvan, who had been frozen in terror behind his lecture podium, slowly emerged from his hiding spot. His reptilian features showed an expression of complete bewilderment as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The most dangerous predator in known space had been handled like a misbehaving house cat. The few students who hadn't made it to the exits stood pressed against the walls, staring in shock. They had expected to witness either a heroic battle or a tragic death. Instead, they had seen something far more disturbing, a demonstration that their worst nightmares could be managed like everyday problems by someone who knew what they were doing. Jake glanced around the room, noting the expressions of horror and disbelief on the faces watching him. He seemed genuinely puzzled by their reactions, as if he couldn't understand what all the fuss was about. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, still maintaining his hold on the slasher. "That little guy who fell... Pip, right? Are you hurt at all?" Pip, the Zentorian student who had been the slasher's original target, could only shake his head mutely. He was staring at Jake with the expression of someone who had just watched their concept of reality get turned upside down. The sound of running footsteps echoed through the hall as campus security finally arrived. A full tactical team burst through the main entrance, armed with heavy tranquilizer weapons and riot shields, ready to face the escaped nightmare predator. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw Jake sitting calmly on the floor, one hand casually resting on a completely motionless slasher, looking like he was waiting for a bus rather than restraining a galactic terror. "Oh, good timing," Jake said cheerfully to the security team. "I was starting to worry I might be late for advanced physics. Could one of you take over here? This guy's not going anywhere, but I probably shouldn't just leave him like this." The security team leader, a battle-hardened veteran who had seen combat across multiple war zones, found himself speechless. In his entire career, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The containment breach that should have resulted in multiple casualties had been resolved by a student who was now worried about missing his next class. Jake carefully transferred his hold to the security officers, explaining exactly which pressure points to maintain and how much force to apply. He spoke about subduing the galaxy's apex predator with the same casual expertise someone else might use to give directions to the nearest coffee shop. The security team worked with practiced efficiency as they administered a fresh dose of powerful sedatives to the Vortex slasher. The creature's eyes slowly closed as the drugs took effect, its massive form going limp under the careful supervision of the Academy's Emergency Response Unit. Medical personnel spread throughout the lecture hall, checking on students who had been caught in the chaos of the evacuation. Jake stood up and brushed dust off his jeans, then immediately turned his attention to his fellow students. Many were still pressed against the walls, staring at it with expressions that ranged from awe to barely concealed terror. Others sat on the floor where they had fallen during the panic, too shaken to move. "Hey, everyone okay over here?" Jake called out as he walked toward a group of trembling students near the emergency exit. His voice carried the same friendly concern it always did, as if the last 10 minutes had been nothing more than a minor classroom disruption. A tall, blue-skinned Altarian student was helping a smaller classmate to her feet when Jake approached. Both of them instinctively stepped back as a human came near, their eyes wide with a new kind of wariness that hadn't been there before. "I'm fine," the Altarian student stammered, clearly not fine at all. "We're both fine. Thank you for what you did." Jake smiled and offered his hand to help steady the smaller student. "No problem at all. That's what classmates are for, right?" He paused, noticing their hesitation. "Are you sure you're not hurt? I've got first aid certification. If anyone needs medical attention, before the medics get to everyone." The casual mention of first aid training sent another ripple of unease through the nearby students. They were beginning to understand that Jake's knowledge wasn't limited to subduing galactic apex predators. He apparently knew how to fix the damage afterward, too. Across the room, Pip the Zentorian was still sitting exactly where he had fallen when the chaos began. His large, dark eyes followed Jake's every movement with a mixture of gratitude and dawning realization that was almost painful to watch. When Jake knelt down beside him, Pip didn't flinch away like the others had. "You saved my life," Pip said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked genuinely surprised by the comment. "I just helped out a classmate who was in trouble. Anyone would have done the same thing." He gestured toward the sedated slasher, being loaded back into a reinforced containment unit. Besides, that big guy wasn't really trying to hurt anyone. He was just confused and scared after waking up in a strange place. The idea that Jake saw the galaxy's most feared predator as simply confused and scared was perhaps more unsettling than anything else he could have said. It revealed a perspective on danger and violence that none of his classmates could truly comprehend. Professor Krillvan approached him slowly, his reptilian features still showing signs of shock. "Jake," he said carefully, "what you did today was remarkable. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of teaching." "Really?" Jake looked pleased but puzzled. "I thought most species would have similar defensive techniques. I mean, every world has predators, right? You just learn to deal with them as part of growing up." The professor exchanged glances with the security team leader, who was still processing his report of the incident. Neither of them quite knew how to explain that most civilized species had developed technology and social structures specifically to avoid ever having to personally confront predators. Over the following days, word of the incident spread throughout the entire academy. Students who hadn't been present during the containment breach heard increasingly dramatic versions of the story. Some claimed Jake had fought the slasher with his bare hands. Others insisted he had somehow hypnotized it into submission. The truth, that he had simply applied practical knowledge with calm efficiency, was somehow more frightening than any of the exaggerated versions. Dean Vextar spent long hours reviewing security footage and interviewing witnesses before finally calling an emergency meeting of the Academy's Administrative Council. The footage showed everything clearly. A human student treating a galactic crisis, like a minor inconvenience, then immediately returning to normal student life as if nothing unusual had happened. "We need to completely revise our Deathworld protocols," the dean announced to the assembled administrators. "Our current guidelines are based on the assumption that Deathworld species are dangerous because they're aggressive or unpredictable. But humans appear to be dangerous precisely because they're so calm and practical about danger." The new entry in the Academy's official species database would eventually read, "Humans, origin, Earth class, 12 Deathworld. Extremely dangerous due to advanced threat assessment and neutralization capabilities. However, species show strong protective instincts toward allies and noncombatants. Recommend treating as helpful allies rather than potential threats." They seem preferred that way. The protocol update also included a note that human students should be immediately contacted during any campus emergency involving dangerous creatures, as they possess practical skills that standard security training could not replicate. Jake never learned about the policy changes or the new database entries. He was too busy with his regular student activities, attending classes, working on group projects, and spending his evenings helping struggling classmates understand their homework assignments. To him, life at the Galactic Academy was exactly what he had hoped for when he left Earth, a chance to learn about the wider universe while making friends from dozens of different worlds. The only change he really noticed was that his classmates seemed more eager to include him in study groups, and professors occasionally asked for his thoughts on topics that seemed completely unrelated to the subjects they were supposed to be covering.